Environmental alert. If you're in Ontario, you definitely want to pay attention to this because today we're breaking down Ontario's Bill 5, officially titled the Protect Ontario by Unleashing Our Economy Act of 2025. It's a piece of new legislation that has sparked a lot of debate. Some say it will boost the economy by cutting red tape. Others worry it could undermine environmental protections. In this video, we'll explore what Bill 5 is, how it might affect conservation efforts, endangered species protections, and the Ontario Greenbelt, and why it matters to people who love nature. We'll also touch on the Greenbelt's history. It's pretty interesting, actually, and we'll wrap up with what you can do if you're concerned. By the end of today's video, you'll have a clear, unbiased understanding of Bill 5 and its potential environmental impacts. Stay tuned, especially if you care about Ontario's parks, forests, and wildlife. This is important stuff for our province's future. What is Bill 5? Bill 5 is known as an omnibus bill, a single proposed law that changes many different rules at once. Premier Doug Ford's government introduced it in April of 2025, saying that it meant to, quote, cut red tape and duplicative processes, unquote, that hold back big projects. In plain language, that means the government believes there are too many slow regulations and that they want to speed things up by building infrastructure, mining critical minerals, and other developments. Quote, we aren't going to take 15 years to get minerals out of the ground, unquote, Premier Ford said, calling Bill 5 an incredible bill to jumpstart key projects. The goal, according to the government, is to grow the economy faster, especially in Northern Ontario's mineral-rich Ring of Fire region. But why is this bill controversial? Well, critics point out that the way Bill 5 speeds things up is by weakening or bypassing environmental rules. One news outlet summed it up by saying, the government claims that Bill 5 will cut red tape to move along critical mining and infrastructure projects, while critics warn it sidesteps or it weakens environmental regulations and even Indigenous rights. In fact, Bill 5 would let the provincial cabinet declare a new special economic zone where normal laws don't fully apply. It would also overhaul how we protect endangered species. These are big changes, so let's break them down one by one. Key changes proposed in Bill 5 include creating special economic zones, or areas where the Ontario government can exempt chosen projects or developers from provincial laws and municipal bylaws. In these zones, requirements under laws like environmental protection or local zoning could be suspended to fast-track development. Essentially, Cabinet could hand-pick their trusted projects and have temporarily say that they don't have to follow certain rules. This is arguably the most powerful and controversial part of the bill. Another part is repealing the Endangered Species Act of 2007. Bill 5 would entirely scrap Ontario's current Endangered Species Act, also known as the ESA, and it would replace it with a new law called the Species Conservation Act of 2025. Many experts say the new act is watered down. We'll discuss exactly how in a moment. The bill also discusses limiting environmental assessments. The bill would exempt or cut short environmental assessment requirements for certain projects. For example, it specifically cancels full environmental assessments for two controversial developments: the proposed Eagle's Nest nickel mine in the far north and a new landfill in Dresden, Ontario. These assessments are supposed to study the project's long-term impacts in nature and communities, but Bill 5 would terminate them entirely. It also talks about bypassing archaeological and heritage protections. If the government deems a project a provincial priority, like a transit or housing project, Bill 5 lets them skip archaeological assessments that might normally be required. This matters because those assessments often ensure Indigenous burial grounds or artifacts are protected, and that they trigger consultations with First Nations. The bill even allows Cabinet to exempt properties from heritage conservation rules if a development is considered important for things like housing or transit. As you can see, there's a lot to unpack. Bill 5 touches laws ranging from mining to heritage sites, but our focus here is on nature. So next, we'll dive deeper into two areas: the Ontario Greenbelt, what it is and why people care, and how Bill 5 changes wildlife and conservation laws. Before we dive any further, have you ever heard about Bill 5 before? What was your initial thoughts on balancing economic growth and environmental protection? Let me know down in the comments. First, let's talk about the Ontario Greenbelt, a term you might have heard in the news. What is the Greenbelt? It's a huge stretch of protected green space, farmland, forests, and wetlands that arc around the Greater Toronto Area. In fact, when Ontario was establishing the Greenbelt in 2005, it became the world's largest protected green space, covering almost 2 million acres, an area bigger than Prince Edward Island. The Greenbelt was created to preserve vital resources. It helps keep our air and our water clean, reduces flood risks by protecting wetlands, provides habitat for our wildlife, and offers beautiful natural areas for people to enjoy hiking, farming, and other recreational pursuits. Here's a little bit of history on the Greenbelt. The Greenbelt was introduced by the Ontario government in a response to rapid urban sprawl. By permanently protecting about 2 million acres of the countryside, the Greenbelt Act of 2005 ensured that the prime farmland and sensitive ecosystems around our cities couldn't be paved over. For many Ontarians, the Greenbelt is a point of pride. It's often called our environmental legacy. However, it hasn't always been smooth sailing. In recent years, there have been political moves to open parts of the Greenbelt to development. For example, in late 2022, the provincial government announced plans to remove about 7,400 acres of Greenbelt land to build housing. This broke a long-standing promise to leave the Greenbelt intact, and it caused a huge public outcry. Critics were alarmed that precious farmland and conservation lands would be sold off to developers. Subsequent investigations by Ontario's Auditor General and Integrity Commissioner revealed the process favored certain developers with ties to the government. I've heard that one before. The backlash was so intense that the government scrapped the Greenbelt development scheme, and even the Minister of Housing resigned in the fallout. Yes, public pressure can actually make a difference. The whole episode is now under RCMP investigation, or federal police investigation. So why bring up the Greenbelt when we're talking about Bill 5? Well, it's because environmental advocates see the parallels. Just like opening the Greenbelt would have paved over forests and farms, they worry that Bill 5 could also lead to more paving of protected areas, albeit in a little bit of a different way. These new special economic zones, for instance, the government could, in theory, override laws that protect Greenbelt lands and other sensitive areas if a project seems to be deemed a priority in their eyes. So imagine, with the stroke of a pen, an area currently off limits due to rules like the Greenbelt Act or local bylaws could become open for development if it's inside of one of these deemed special zones. Community groups are concerned that this might be used to sidestep protections for cherished green spaces. As one coalition leader put it, with a single stroke, any neighborhood could be branded a special zone where clean water protections, endangered species protections, local bylaws, and even Indigenous treaty rights could be simply vanished. That's not prosperity. That's steamrolling community rights. Those are strong words, but they capture the fear that Bill 5 might undo environmental safeguards in places like the Greenbelt. One of the biggest changes in Bill 5 is how it would rewrite the rules for protecting endangered species in Ontario. Currently, the province's endangered plants and animals are protected under the Endangered Species Act of 2007, also known as the ESA. Ontario's ESA was actually considered one of the strongest laws of its kind in Canada because it automatically gave at-risk species and their habitats legal protection. For example, if a species was listed as endangered, its habitat, the areas it needs to live and to recover, was protected by default. This included all sorts of creatures, from the tiny Jefferson salamander here and the monarch butterfly to the majestic woodland caribou, many rare birds and plant species as well. The idea was to safeguard the full range of places these species use throughout their life cycles. Bill 5 seeks to repeal, completely cancel, that 2007 Endangered Species Act and replace it with a new law called the Species Conservation Act of 2025. Don't let the nice-sounding name fool you, though, because experts say this new act would weaken protections. So here are a few key differences. There's narrower habitat definition. The new act would define habitat very narrowly. Under the current law, habitat means any area a species needs for its life process, from feeding, breeding, migrating, etc. But under Bill 5, habitat would only include the immediate area an animal occupies, like its den or nest and a little bit of the surrounding land. For plants, it would basically just protect the soil right around the roots. Environmentalists argue that this makes no biological sense. Animals move around. One biologist gave an example. Imagine an animal with a den that wanders around, gathering food, drinking from a creek, and finding a mate within its territory. To protect the species, the full range of areas it relies on must be preserved. Under the new definition, habitat protection would be limited to just the den. In short, species would lose protection for most of the areas that they roam and migrate to. Another change is there's fewer species that are automatically protected. Bill 5 would give the government more discretion over which species get listed for protection. Right now, an independent scientific body called COSSARO assesses which species are at risk. Normally, if scientists determine a species is endangered, it gets listed under the law. But the new rules say that the cabinet will not be required to list a species just because scientists say it's at risk. In other words, the government can pick and choose. Some fear politics or business interests could interfere with what should be science-based decisions on wildlife protection. Also have to talk about loopholes for habitat destruction. Perhaps most startling, the New Species Conservation Act would allow developers or industries to harm protected species habitats as long as they register the activity in a government registry. This is a big shift. Under the old ESA, harming the habitat of an endangered species usually required a special permit, and those permits could be denied or come with very strict conditions and fines. Under Bill 5's approach, it sounds more like a notify us and proceed system, which critics call a pay-to-slay style loophole. Essentially, as long as a company files a registration and perhaps pays a fee or follows basic guidelines, they could legally destroy habitat that previously would have been completely off limits. I have to talk about migratory birds and aquatic species that are now excluded. Surprisingly, the new act wouldn't even apply to certain creatures at all. Migratory birds and some fish and aquatic species would be left out of Ontario's law, likely with the assumption that they're covered by federal laws, but it still leaves a lot of gaps. That means provincial protections for, say, a migratory bird's nesting area might no longer exist. Environmental groups are extremely alarmed by these changes. They argue that Ontario's current endangered species law, while not perfect, at least tried to recover species, not just prevent extinction. The new law, they say, drops that proactive recovery focus entirely. One Ontario nature expert noted that many species were already in decline, and giving them less protection now could be devastating. In fact, an eco-justice lawyer didn't mince words when he said, "The only thing that has been unleashed with this bill is an irrational vendetta against vulnerable ecosystems. It's a bill that is designed to make species extinct." That quote underscores how conservationists see Bill 5. Not as a minor tweak, but as a radical step backwards for wildlife protection. The government, for its part, insists it will still protect species and just wants to streamline the process. Premier Ford said, "We're always going to be very conscious of making sure that we take care of the environment," suggesting that economic growth and environmental care can go hand in hand. The clash here is really about how much trust to place in the government's discretion versus strict legal safeguards. Oh, what do you think? Can we rely on the government to protect at-risk species without strong laws, or should the laws be a little bit more strict? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Between the special economic zones and the new species laws, Bill 5 represents a significant shift in Ontario's approach to the environment. Critics say that, taken together, these changes blunt the regulations that ensure construction and extraction don't cause undue harm to land, water, and wildlife, and human health. Let's summarize the potential impacts in everyday terms. We're talking about protected areas could be at risk. Laws that normally shield fragile wetlands, greenbelt lands, or conservation reserves might be overridden in special zones. There's concern about law-free zones, where mining or construction projects wouldn't have to follow rules about clean water, land use, or even local noise and traffic bylaws. Imagine a large development plopped into your community with almost no oversight. That's the scenario people fear if these zones are abused. Environmental Defence, a Canadian advocacy organization, warns that Premier Ford is making it easier for his friends to pave over farms, forests, and wetlands and wipe out endangered species without any guide rails. The mention of friends refers to the worry that developers with insider connections will probably going to benefit the most. Don't forget, endangered species could decline faster. With habitat protection scaled back, species like Ontario's woodland caribou, Blanding's turtles, or rare birds might lose key refuges. Experts point out that just protecting the status quo isn't enough. Many of these species need more habitat and active recovery efforts to survive, not less. If Bill 5 passes, Ontario would go from having one of the strongest wildlife laws to one of the weakest, according to conservationists. These are species that need more than what they have right now, and we're giving them less, said one advocate in dismay. The phrase designed to make species extinct is a hyperbole, but it shows the level of frustration and fear among scientists and environmental lawyers. There's also a less public voice in decisions. Another aspect of Bill 5 is reducing public consultation opportunities. For instance, it explicitly removes the requirement for public notice or comment on environmental decisions for the Ontario Place redevelopment in Toronto. That worries people because it sets a precedent. Big projects could advance without communities even knowing or having a say. After all, if rules can be waived in a special zone, local residents and even city councils might be bypassed. Many see this as anti-democratic. Democracy Watch co-founder Duff Concher remarked that Bill 5 hands the cabinet unconstitutional king-like powers to change any law without review or vote, which sounds dramatic but underlines the concerns about oversight. We also have to talk about how Indigenous rights are completely sidelined. Several First Nations leaders have strongly opposed Bill 5. The law doesn't publicly ensure the duty to consult Indigenous communities before creating special zones on their traditional lands. Given Ontario's mining push in the far north, this is a major issue. Indigenous chiefs have said that they will go to court if necessary, asserting that these lands are not Ontario's to do with as they wish. Our consent has not been provided. Ignoring treaty rights and consultation could not only be unconstitutional, but it also damages relationships and risks further conflicts on the ground. On this point, Premier Ford insists that his government is consulting and that many First Nations are excited for the jobs and infrastructure projects, but clearly not all Indigenous leaders agree. In summary, environmental watchdogs and community groups see Bill 5 as a potential step backwards for Ontario's hard-won environmental protections. They compare the fight against it to the fight to save the Greenbelt last year. As Environmental Defence's Director Tim Gray says, Premier Ford promised to protect Ontario, but Bill 5 breaks that promise. Just like we did with the Greenbelt, we need to come together to stop this attack. It's a call to action for citizens who care about nature and accountability. Now you might be wondering, what can regular people actually do about a big bill like this? Great question, and that's exactly what we're going to cover next. If you're concerned about the environmental impacts of Bill 5, you're not alone. Many groups from local nature clubs to big organizations like Ontario Nature and the Environmental Defence are mobilizing people to speak up. Here are a few ways Ontario residents can take action in a respectful and democratic way. Contact your MPP. Your member of provincial parliament is your voice at Queen's Park. You can call, email, or write a letter to your local MPP to tell them your thoughts on Bill 5. Whether you support parts of the bill or oppose it entirely, letting your representative know how you feel is important. Politicians do pay attention to constituent concerns. If enough people raise environmental issues, it can influence how MPPs vote or what amendments they push for. As one legal group urged, Ontario residents should let the government know that these latest legislative rollbacks are unacceptable and that Bill 5 must be withdrawn. Even if withdrawal is unlikely, pressure can lead to changes. So don't hesitate to politely share your perspectives, because it matters. You can also sign petitions and open letters. Environmental organizations have created petitions to oppose Bill 5's harmful sections. For example, Ontario Nature has called this a big moment to mobilize for nature and is inviting people to sign their petition asking Premier Ford to cancel Bill 5. Signing a petition might seem small, but large numbers of signatures can send a powerful message. There are also open letters, some by Indigenous leaders, some by coalition of scientists, that you might add your name or share on social media. This public pressure helped reverse the Greenbelt land removals, and it could make a difference here too. You can also submit comments to the ERO. Ontario's Environmental Registry, also known as the ERO, is a portal where the public can comment on proposed laws and regulations. Bill 5's various schedules were posted there for feedback. If those comment periods are still open, they often last a few weeks, you can submit your concerns in writing through the ERO website. Here's a little update. As of mid-May 2025, the comment period on Bill 5 was scheduled to close by May 17th of 2025, but even if that deadline passed, public input can still be given through other channels like MPPs or committee hearings. Of course, you can always spread the word. Sometimes the best thing that you can do is to raise awareness. Share information with friends, family, or on social media about what Bill 5 entails. A lot of people care about clean water, wildlife, and parks, but they might not know that this legislation is happening. By informing others in a respectful and fact-based way, you help build a community of concerned citizens. The more visible the issue, the more likely your leaders will respond. Think about the Greenbelt story. It was public awareness and media attention that really turned the tide. Let's talk about supporting environmental groups. Organizations like Environmental Defence, Ontario Nature, Canadian Environmental Law Association, also known as CLIA, Indigenous communities, and others are actively campaigning on this. You can support them by donating, volunteering, or simply amplifying their messages. These groups often have insider knowledge of the legislative process and can guide effective activism. They also sometimes organize events, like webinars or rallies, where you can learn more and you can show solidarity. Finally, remember to stay respectful and hopeful. It's so easy to get discouraged with these complex issues, but positive change can happen. Ontario's environment, from the Greenbelt's green fields to the northern peatlands, has immense value, and many people from all walks of life want to protect it. Even if you're pro-development, it's possible to seek balance where we grow our economy and we safeguard nature. In this video, we've explored Ontario's Bill 5 and its potential environmental impacts. We learned that Bill 5 is about speeding up development and mining projects, but it does so by loosening rules on things like endangered species protection, land use, and public oversight. We talked about the cherished Ontario Greenbelt and why it exists, and how public attention saved it from development once before. We broke down how the bill could change conservation in Ontario, from narrowing habitat protections to creating zones where laws don't really apply. We've heard quotes from both sides. The Premier promising jobs and faster progress, and environmentalists warning of the risks to nature and democracy. Now, I would love to hear from you. Do you think Bill 5 goes too far in cutting environmental safeguards? Or do you believe it's necessary to have this step to boost Ontario's economy? Let's have a respectful discussion in the comments. Your opinion matters, and engaging in dialogue is how we all stay informed and hold our leaders accountable. If you found this explanation helpful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more content on environmental and civic issues. And most importantly, if you're passionate about what you heard, consider taking one of the action steps. Even a small effort like sending an email or signing a petition can add up when thousands and thousands of people do it. As the Greenbelt story showed, public voices can really make a difference. Thank you so much for watching and caring about Ontario's natural heritage. Together, let's strive for an Ontario that thrives economically and environmentally. We deserve nothing less. Take care, and I'll see you next time.